Welcome to the Writer Reads Short Stories. This is Harper's Choice, Part 1. The world turns differently for each of us, and we have no choice but to turn with it, to take its hand and dance the next set of steps. Those were the words Gillis had lived by, and by those words he had died. I stared down at his body and thought what a liar he had been. We always have a choice of what to dance when the world rhythm plays. We don't have to dance the way it demands. We can dance a counterpoint and not let our steps be chosen for us. Gillis had known that. He had merely hidden behind his words of false wisdom so he had an excuse for what he did. I looked around at the burning warehouse. Well, he has no excuse for this. I looked down at his body, and all I felt was numb. Around me, the pixies swarmed and flew, flitting through falling cinders to make sure no one had been left behind. The elves had taken their dogs clear of the fire, and the unicorns trotted down each burning aisle to make sure they'd found each and every smuggler that had been involved. I just stood, staring at the burning equipment they'd used to turn the pixies into dust, Gillis's body at my feet. All I felt was hollow. He'd been going to gift me to the trolls. I was frozen by the thought of it, stunned beyond terror, held in thrall by disbelief. The hand that curled around my bicep and pulled me away from the blaze should have come as a surprise, but I felt nothing. At least the voice was gentle. Come on. I was aware of the warehouse gradually emptying, of the unicorns gathering around me, and the pixies forming a protective shell around us. I didn't resist as my escort took me past the police cordon, accepting a blanket from one of the paramedics as we left. We kept moving as he draped that blanket around my shoulders and then tucked an arm across my back. It was like moving through a dream, surrounded by unicorns and pixies, my uniform holed by embers, my hands. I looked down and then remembered how to feel and stopped dead. Shades of the Luca, my escort swore when he heard me gasp. Don't look, he added as I started to raise my hands so I could see them better. Of course I ignored him, and only the arm he had around my shoulders and the hasty grip on my wrist stopped me crumbling. I could see. I could see burnt flesh and bone. I wanted to be sick. I wanted to run and leave my hands far, far behind. I didn't know what I wanted. You got them out of the vat, he said, holding me tight. You saved them all. I wasn't sure that would be compensation enough for losing both my hands. The Druids can help you, he said, and I wanted to laugh. Managed it, too, if that tiny broken sound could be counted as a laugh. We kept moving, walking further from the warehouse and entering the trees at the edge of the park, and then walking through them and beyond. I wasn't even aware we'd crossed the barrier between worlds until the Druids stepped into our path. With snorting whickers of anxiety, the unicorns nudged me forward, buffeting my escort as well. He didn't protest their rough handling, nor complain about being smeared by the blood on their muzzles or the gore dripping from their horns, but he kept his arm tight across my shoulders and his hand around my wrists. Help with what? The Druid wanted to know, and then he saw my hands. I caught the horrified look he cast my escort and watched him glare at the gathered unicorns and pixie swarm, and then he looked into my face and down at my hands. I followed his gaze and wondered if I should hurt more, if it was normal to feel so cold and so empty, or if I should be worried that, despite his presence, I felt so very, very alone. Who did this to you? The Druid asked, looking back to my face and snaring my eyes with his own. Who? And I knew he did not mean who had hurt my hands or caused the multiple burns all over my body, but who it was who had ravaged my soul. Gillis, I said, and fell, knowing I was lifted before I hit the ground. The first time I woke, I did not care. The trees arched overhead, and the warm bulk of a unicorn nestled against my back. A small flock of pixies kept watch from the edge of the blanket, waving as my eyes fluttered open and then closed again. The second time I woke, the pixies were gone, and I was alone in my blankets. I wondered where the unicorn was, and then wondered why I cared. The pixie that landed on the edge of my bed made me smile. I knew him, even though I did not know his name. "You made it," I said, surprised to find my voice no more than a whisper, as if I had worn it out with shouting. I felt sadness and relief when the pixie sat down by my head and laid a gentle hand on my hair. "Thank you," he said, as my eyes closed again. The third time I woke, the pixie was gone, and his absence brought tears. I closed my eyes and fell asleep to the sound of quiet hoofsteps and soft whickering, wondering where the pixies were and why the unicorn sounded so far away. I had the feeling something terrible had happened, but didn't know what. The fourth time I woke, it was to the roar of a troll, and I rolled out of bed and had my back against the far wall before I was fully awake. I was looking for a weapon, any weapon, but I couldn't see one, and my hands were bandaged and sore. I probably couldn't have held a weapon if I'd tried. When the troll roared again, there was agony in its voice, and I saw the first golden beams of sunrise touching the leaves above. Knowing I was safe, I sat on the edge of the bed, contenting myself with just staring at the dawn. I lay down and slept as the first pixies flitted in and out of the sunlight. They were still there when I woke again, but I heard no trolls. I sat up and watched the pixies spiral skyward, rejoicing in the day's arrival, and slowly realized I was looking out at the forest from the heights of a tree. "Nice," I murmured, understanding why I hadn't woken up beside another unicorn. Footsteps echoed over the wooden floor, and I turned toward them, realizing there was a balcony beyond my window. A familiar shape moved across one of the windows and stopped outside the door. There was no knock, just the door swinging open and the elf coming through. "Are you ready to return to your world?" he asked, and I saw no compassion in his beautiful face. "It wasn't a dream?" I asked, and he shook his head, making the memories that had haunted my sleep become all too real. "I please just," and I buried my face in my hands, blocking out the sight of him and the sight of pixies dancing in the sunbeams beyond. "Just what?" he asked when I'd sat too quiet for too long. "Just go," I said, not daring to look at him. One does not tell the Fae to go away, and especially not when they're guests in the Fae realm itself. Even I knew that. Of course he did not go. He did not move. He just stood there until I lifted my head out of my hands to look at him. "You're still here," I said, before he could say a word. "And you need to leave," he said. "You've been here far too long." I looked down at my hands. They looked the same as they always had. Well, as they always had, except for that one time when I'd seen them after the warehouse fire. I stared at my palms, trying to work out how long I had to have slept for the flesh to have grown back and the pain to have gone. And then I looked up at his face. "How—" I began, but he cut me off. "The Druids," and his tone was sharp. I stared. "They've exacted their price." From the sound of it, that topic was closed, but I still asked, "What do I owe—" My voice dried in my throat at the look on his face. "It is paid," he said, "and for your service we exact no cost." "My what?" I asked, and a look of impatient fury marred his features. Remembering the fire, I stood up and looked around. "I'll go," I said, and he pointed at a stack of clothes folded on a nearby chair. "Get dressed." The clothes made me realize I wasn't wearing much of anything, but the elf didn't seem to care. I glared at him. "You'll have to leave," I said. "No." "I need to get dressed." "Your point?" "You could at least look away." He stared at me for a long moment and then nodded, crossing to the window. "Better?" Given it reminded me there were no curtains and the windows looked out into a forest full of pixies, not much, but I gave him the answer he wanted. Yes. It was the fastest clothes change I've ever done. For one thing, I didn't know if he'd stay looking out the window. And for another, pixies or not, the fact anyone could see in made me really uneasy. It seemed I could feel something after all. This way, he said when I was done, and he headed for the door. This time I was able to follow on my own. I did not need a swarm of pixies and a herd of unicorns to guide me. I did not need the strength of his arm across my shoulders to keep me upright. I still felt nothing, and I wondered if the numbness would ever fade, or if that was part of the price the Druids asked. We went down a staircase made of planks and ropes, and suspended between a branch in the forest floor, and then we walked out across grass partially buried by fallen leaves. It's autumn? You slept. How long? I began, but he held up his hand for silence. We're about to cross the vale. It's Canterbury Park, I told him. How bad can it be? He looked at me, and I caught a flash of pity. Maybe. It was either that or indigestion. Finally, he shrugged. You never know what you'll find on the other side, he said, and we were about to move forward when I heard footsteps running through the leaves behind us. We both turned, and the elf cursed.